our job application system, okay? And it is accessible online at neogov.com. We contract with NeoGov and provide what we think is accessible job prospectuses that people can apply for online. And in fact, we actually had a question for the task force because we felt that was about what might not be accessible in NeoGov. We cannot control, and I think maybe there is a perception in part that some state job prospectuses, which are scraped by third parties and pulled into other applications, should be accessible, and we can't necessarily control whether those third-party applications are accessible or not. And so that's one. We just wanted to know if there was an experience with NeoGov in particular that you found that was not accessible. So that's something for your consideration, I think. Outside of that, the state's job application and application process, we feel meets the accessibility requirements and is actually being reviewed right now to ensure that it is accessible as well. And each job announcement contains instructions for applicants to request an accommodation in the event that you do find something about the process that is inaccessible as well. So just wanted, again, additional feedback about whether those accommodations were not accessible in some way as well, and whether, even third parties, okay, that may not be translating or providing that information in their applications.
Thank you, Seth. And Rob, I'm going to bring you in just 30 seconds. I do want to share with the group, we've now received enough responses from the members not online that I can tell you we are not going to have a quorum. I don't want to consume too much of everyone's time, so I'm going to ask everyone to stick around for another 10 or 15 minutes while we address some questions, get some clarifications, but then I'm going to give you a little bit of time back. In full transparency, it's going to be a bad trade for you because I'm going to give you time back today and I'm going to ask for even more in return so we can get everyone back together and finish this voting. I want to apologize to the members and all of our guests and thank you for your time today. Let's continue to use this a bit for clarifications while we've got some really informed guests who are supportive of this work. Rob, you wanted to weigh in.
Hi, Seth. Rob Hernandez here, Office of Accessibility, City of Colorado Springs, also task force member. So NeoGov, the city, we've evaluated NeoGov. We use it as well. It's not, we do recognize it's third party, right? And it's not fully accessible. Okay, so there's we're gonna have to work with NeoGov to see what can happen there. The thing is, we have to keep in mind is the House bill requires it to be accessible. Okay, but the U.S. bill that's coming forth in 26 does not. Okay, but we're in the state of Colorado, so that's what we have to follow. And I think the way to look at it too, even if we didn't make the third party play ball, I guess you could say, right? The thing is we have to keep in mind is, are we discriminating? Okay, when we're offering jobs to the public, is all the public able to participate? If they're not, then we got a problem. That's one way we have to look at it. So, and I think that's probably one reason that maybe the House bill looked at going that route. So I see Kevin McDaniel is on the line. Can you lend anything to that, Kevin?
Thank you, Rob. I would only speak to it just as someone who has worked in accessibility. I would let Seth speak to anything from DPA. But to the extent that things can be made accessible to the maximum extent feasible, that's the level that we want to get to the point that it's not an undue burden on the organization. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, Rob, for adding the questions and that local perspective of the experience with it. I'm walking a fine line here because we've got some informed and knowledgeable guests who I want our members to have access to. I also don't want to have conversations that are deliberations about ideas while we don't have all of our members, even though I'm going to make all of them listen or watch the video. But Shannon, Kylie, Rob, Craig, do any of you have questions or comments for our guests from OIT or DPA? Shannon.
Yes. Yes, thank you. I'm curious now, as far as the word accessibility, it is a very intriguing word. Technology, technically for communication, yes, but as far as language, there are different perspectives. As a deaf person who has had access to education, I am able to read, but there are some who the written word is not as accessible. When we consider different disabilities, we want to, some are not able to read the English and therefore it is not accessible. Also, the grammar could be a block to that. Some in the deaf community in general, so I have a higher level of education, but not all deaf people do. And so when a deaf person reads that, they may not have access to the language. And that may be kind of off topic, but that's a point I would like to make.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm not seeing or hearing further questions from our members. Michael or Seth, one, as I say that, I see a hand go up. Michael and Seth, I'm just going to give a heads up. If you have thoughts you want to share with the group, I'll invite you to do so after I hear their final question. But right now I have a question from one of our members, Craig.
Hello, everyone. Craig Towler, committee member. This is a follow-up question to Shannon's point, and probably maybe for Seth. You were speaking to NeoGov meeting accessibility standards. Is language accessibility included in those standards where requirements for simplified language or anything like that included in those standards, or what is the limit of those current accessibility standards that it is in compliance with?
So
Thank you. Yes, thank you. That I was going to ask that.
So, I think the way we understand accessibility from a statutory perspective is probably more focused on WCAG. And so this may be a question that is also appropriate in that respect for Michael. I don't think it does include language accessibility. And there is actually a separate, as I understand it, committee or task force meeting on language accessibility now, and they are addressing some of these questions around language accessibility.
Michael, you got wrangled into joining the call, which means I'm going to pass this question to you. How is OIT approaching both from the legislative directive and your implementation approach on this question of language accessibility and how broad or narrow of a definition of accessibility OIT is working with on issues like this?
In short, there's no direct connection to the plain language piece, but our office does strive and has a lot of resources and tools that have gone out with all of the accessibility work, including how to write in plain language. Our rules have been also promulgated, have been posted specifically in a plain language format online as well. And so we've made an effort to make sure that every resource that we provide is something that folks can use. And so we definitely have resources that have been created to encourage plain language use, but it does fall short in terms of the regulation. So.
Thank you. Michael and Seth, I'll ask the same question to both of you. And I want to be clear, when I ask questions, it's not because I have an opinion. I'm trying to pull threads of the group conversations. This committee is addressing government broadly, which is not just state government. So we're referring to any type of county, city, town, or village, local government. Can you speak at all to what role the state does or does not have under that legislation to require anything that a local entity does, or anything that you all are involved with local governments? I know we have the Division of Local Government over at DOLA who provides some networking, but have you had any direct role with local governments? And I'm asking this because you guys are giving some great information about what the state is doing. This group is going to be making recommendations both for what the state should do and what they'd like to see at the local level.
Yeah, I can jump in and maybe allow Seth to add any additional context. OIT's authority is restricted in a sense that we have direct authority within state government and state departments and the agencies that we serve at that level. There is authority for us in statute to create technology accessibility standards, and that's where our rulemaking authority is based upon in the promulgated rules that we've put in place on top of the law and the standards there. So our rules, as you can see, if they're in the applicability sections as they've been promulgated, they do apply directly to state governments. However, they do apply differently to the local governments, particularly just because of that authority boundary that we have within state government. And so that being said, the rules were intended to be applicable to everybody who wants to adopt them and follow them. And frankly, the rules were also drafted and created in such a way to help make sense for local governments as well as state entities for how to approach this from a legality standpoint, ultimately, and trying to make sure that they can demonstrate compliance. And so the rules were intended to add further definitions and can really define that compliance structure so that an entity, a local government at the state, if you're following those rules, you know exactly where you stand from a compliance standpoint. You're able to determine whether or not and what are your undue burdens and how to document them appropriately.
Seth, and I know DPA has even less of a role with local governments, but if you've got anything you'd like to add, I'll invite you.
All I would add in very short answer to your question is no. we don't have a direct authority over local governments, and ultimately the authority that the state exercises over local governments is almost entirely statutory. I would venture to say that even DOLA has very relatively little authority when it comes to local governments and regulating local governments. Its primary responsibility is to relate to local governments, to provide resources to them, and to help them do basically meet their statutory obligations.
I appreciate both. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, yes. And just to be clear, and I apologize, I don't know that I introduced myself or my name for the group either. So Michael McReynolds, Senior Manager of Gov Affairs and Ledge Liaison for OIT. I apologize for that. I did just want to make it clear, the rules and the standards themselves and the law have been written in a way to apply to all public entities. And so that's where you see the rules built off of the standards and statutes. I'm happy to talk about the specifics around the authority piece of OIT's specific authority of what we actually have direct control over. And that's where I was going in terms of the direct control and influence over those local governments and some boundaries there. So, but the rules themselves, just to be clear, and the law apply to all public entities in Colorado.
Thank you very much. And I know some of this, it may be more understood to those who live in the weeds and those of us who are a little more policy wonks. But both for our members and anybody who happens to be listening or watching, I wanted to make sure that we differentiate between authorities and rules and the role of the state versus the role of local governments. Because as I said, this group is making recommendations of what it should be the experience of a Coloradan with a disability in applying to work for any government agency or body anywhere in the state. So really appreciate both of you helping us walk through that. We are probably going to, out of respect for everyone's time, wrap up in a few minutes. But do any of our members have questions for Seth or Michael while we've got them? Rob. Rob, you're still on mute, my friend.
Okay.
we
Robert, yes, City of Colorado Springs, task force member. So we received quite a bit of response. So I'll be honest, I have to get through it all. But I was looking at one of them, Seth, where you shared that, you know, you had, it says, we are concerned about the proposed requirement that every government entity, regardless of size, be required to have a full-time ADA coordinators. Since entities do not have a full workload that necessitates these as full-time positions. So basically the concern is, are they going to be gainfully employed? Is that what you're saying, or?
So I think our concern around every agency having ADA coordinators is that we don't simply have the resources to employ all of them. As well, those ADA coordinators within each agency would ultimately have a very large workload on behalf of that agency, right? So what I'm saying is that it would require FTE. We would require additional staff for those coordinators, and it's a budgetary concern.
Yeah, so we're going to be working through all this and researching and providing more questions, answers. But I think the correct me if I'm wrong, Barrick, but the intent here is government entity. So in other words, a municipality. Okay. So if you go to a municipality and it's over 50 employees, then you definitely want to have at least one ADA coordinator. But then you get into a bigger municipality like where I'm at, where we're 3,500 employees. I have a staff of 4. Okay, and we're gainfully employed. Okay, but then you get into some municipalities where they might only have 5 or 10 employees. You know, but they're government, so they're required. So what tends to happen there is 2 or 3 townships or small community municipalities will join forces and hire one person to cover that area, because the reality of it is you wouldn't want to hire that one person and not gainfully employ them. So, and as far as the state goes, agencies, you got to look at how many employees are there, right? And you kind of have to just break it down to see what's really required. Because remember, it's 50 employees or more, right? It's a general standard. So if you're a state, how many people are employed by the state, by the way?
So overall, and I found our actual our written comment, and so that provides me with a little bit more context. But to answer your question, we have more than 30,000 classified state employees. If you count non-classified state employees that work outside of the personnel system, there are approximately 100,000 state employees. The size of each agency is, to your point, I think, Rob, it varies dramatically, right?
Yeah.
And so whether there's enough workload for an ADA coordinator within each agency is to some extent subject to the size of that agency, right? But then also, right, on the flip side, you may have agencies that are, 5,000 strong, and a single ADA coordinator wouldn't necessarily be enough. And so simply saying every agency needs an ADA coordinator, right? I think we need to do a lot of balancing.
Yeah.
And to that point, like, we do have designated Title I coordinators And that role may be filled by an HR professional currently,
Yeah.
right? Depending on the size of the agency now.
Yeah, and that's a different role. That's employment, right? But yeah, you have to take all that into consideration, and that's what we're talking about. The agency might be so small that it doesn't warrant having a one ADA coordinator, but maybe it's combination of 2 or 3 agencies sharing that one coordinator, right? It's a long discussion that has to be discussed and researched, but it's all being looked at.
And I just want to name that we talked through this in the last conversation, and Seth, so you and Michael know where this group's conversation was to move forward with the recommendation requirement for each jurisdiction to have an ADA coordinator with the caveat or a threshold of the number of FTEs that would trigger that. I will share there was a pretty strong feeling across the group throughout the last year that person should be distinct from somebody in risk management so that we don't get a conflict of interest in what they're advising. With that, and it being 12:10, and again, my apologies to everybody who made time on their calendars today, and my sincere thanks for everybody being on here. I'm going to wrap up today's call. Members and those who would like to join us again, my colleague Carrie is going to be reaching out to you this afternoon and to all of our members. We had thought we would just need to find an additional 45 or 60 minutes to wrap things up. I'm going to tell you we're going to need a full work session or 2. So everyone knows, again, what timeline we're working on. We are legislatively required to submit our recommendations to the executive committee by the 1st of December. The 1st of December happening to be on a Sunday, and for our good luck, happening to be the Sunday after Thanksgiving. That means that report will go on Monday the 2nd, which means our recommendations need to be tightened up before Thanksgiving. All of that is my long-winded way of saying I'm going to need to spend some time with you next week to get through the rest of our ideas and recommendations. I'm going to do our best to find time that works around your already busy work schedules. Some of the other subcommittees are meeting as early as 7:30 to 9 a.m. or 8 to 9:30. We also know some folks have kiddos to drop off. So if we need to work around that, we will. But members, we'll follow up with you this afternoon. Any interested guests, as soon as we nail down the date and time, we will get this posted on the DORA website for this task force. And I will drop my email in the chat. If anybody would like follow up about today's meeting or when the meeting will be, you're welcome to contact me directly. Again, I want to thank everybody and apologize we weren't able to get through as much as we had intended today. I'll give you back this bit of time. I'll take it on the other side next week. Michael and Seth, thank you very much. Members, thank all of you. And we will get back together at least once next week. And I appreciate everybody's time today.
Our pleasure, Barrett. Thank you all.
Thank you all.